Alright, what's good, YouTube? Gentleman Thomas here, and I am technically back. I've been away for a couple of days, not like away, but more I've taken a small break between Platinum finishing and the regular season of UPA being over. Though we are in the playoff race, so expect both a team builder and a battle in the coming weekend. I'm actually here to introduce a new league I'm gonna be in. This is the second season of the league, and I technically wasn't in the first season, though I did take over a team for the final 5 games, I think. Uh, and this league is called the Roost Draft League. Now, the Roost Draft League is a low tier draft league, actually. That means that some of the higher mons, the more valuable mons you can get, are typically a low tier 2, a high tier 3, though this league is point based, which I will talk about a little bit more in a sec. But yeah, I'm really excited to get to play in the Roost from the beginning this time around, because the team I took over last season was 0-6 by the time, and when I finished, I was 5-6. I won all 5 of my games, and I was actually only differential away from making playoffs. That was probably one of the best runs I've ever had as a draft league player. I don't know what it was. I tend to do rather well with low tier mounts, so I think that might have something to do with it. Which I'm very excited about this league now, because maybe this is what I'm gonna be good at. Maybe I'm supposed to be a low tier draft league player. Who knows? But yeah, a little bit about this league. So I was the first pick overall, which completely blew my mind. I wasn't ready. The owner, which is called Hunch, which is why you see the Hunch Crows, um, kind of dropped the document, and then almost immediately after, or very shortly after, dropped the drafting order, and I was first, and I was like, I didn't even have a chance to look at the doc before he had dropped the order, so I actually had to spend like an hour or something to try and figure out a team. But yeah, I was first pick overall. Now, the league rules states that you have to draft between 9 and 11 Pokemon. You're not restricted to a specific number. You just have to have a minimum of 9, and you can't go above 11. As I mentioned before, it's a point system with 100 points in a snake style draft. So that means I was number one. Then all the other coaches drafts once, and then they draft one more time before it gets to me again. But then I get to draft 2 months in a row. The highest end of months were 18 points, and the lowest end was of course 1 point. The very interesting part about this league, besides being a low tier draft league, is cut moves are actually allowed. So moves like Pursuit, Signal Beam, and probably the most important one, Hidden Power moves are allowed, which means you can run Hidden Power Ice, Hidden Power Fire on whatever you want. But yeah, so this, if you're not already guessed, is going to be my kind of draft analysis, draft recap, whatever you want to call it, of the team I got out with. I'm fairly happy about the team, though I definitely do see some improvements that can be made, but I want to play like 2 or 3 weeks before I decide to really do anything. But my round one pick, as I mentioned, I was first, so I had total freedom of what I wanted. And honestly, I was so overwhelmed. I didn't know I didn't even know what was a good low tier mon to start out with, because I took over a team before, so I already had kind of a base to go by. Where this time around, I had to start from scratch. The 18-point mons were mons like Greninja with Torrent, of course, Cobalion, Entei. I didn't really feel a whole lot of them, so I actually ended up going with a mon that wasn't 18 points in Lucario. Now, Lucario is going to be known as Impulse on my team, and I drafted Impulse, the Lucario, simply because I really wanted to use Lucario. I'd never used it before. I think it has such an interesting way you can play with it because it gets set up on both the physical and special side. It has a decent speed tier, not the greatest. It could be a little bit faster, but it's okay because it can make up for it in some priority moves, which brings me to my pros and cons here. Now, Lucario was 17 points, and I actually think 17 points is okay for Lucario. Depending on how it performs this season, of course, I can ask myself if I think it was worth 17 points. But at the time I drafted it, I definitely think it being 17 and not 18 makes sense because I do see the faults in Lucario, but also see a lot of the strengths in Lucario. One of the biggest strengths in Lucario is, of course, the big versatility it comes with. As I mentioned, you have both physical and special offensive pressure. You got setup, you got priority. You have a couple of different status moves you can use, like of course toxic, because Lucario is a Gen 8 mon, so every mon pretty much has toxic. As mentioned, it has several priority moves. We have access to bullet punch, extreme speed, and vacuum wave. And overall, I think Lucario just has a really high offensive pressure. It can give your opponent. You can force your opponent to prep for Lucario every week, and then you can kind of figure out how do you break down your opponent's team so Lucario can potentially sweep in the end, or does Lucario break down your opponent's team so you have another mon that can sweep in the end. Now, of course, one of the cons and not so good things about Lucario is it's a steel type that doesn't have a whole lot of bulk. So, like, if you go up against a dragon type or a fairy type, especially because Lucario is steel fighting, if you go up against fairy types that are really strong, you can kind of run into some issues. Same goes with dragon types. Typically, you want a good steel type to go against dragon types, unless, of course, they have access to earthquake, close combat, or whatever. But Lucario isn't the greatest because it doesn't have that much bulk. It also has no momentum moves, which is a little bit annoying. That means whenever you bring in Lucario, you have to make sure you either get a kill or pressure something out, or only make it as a swap pivot, so you actually don't do anything. If it got like the U-turn, it would be perfect. You could swap it in, U-turn, because you would most likely pressure something out, and then get into a new mon. And lastly, I think Lucario has kind of a curse in disguise, the opposite of a blessing. Because it can do as much as it can, you can actually come up with the end up in the four moves slot syndrome, which means you actually don't know what to bring on Lucario. Do you bring the setup? Do you bring four attacking moves? Do you bring item could also be, do you bring life orb? Do you bring choice band? Do you bring choice scarf? Do you bring expert belt? Do you bring focus sash? Like, it becomes a lot you have to think about with Lucario. That's kind of the same thing I experienced with Mew in UPA. um, while I like Mew, I kind of feel like I had forced it into a more defensive role most of the time, even though it might have been better offensively. And you can kind of end up with the same in Lucario, where you won't necessarily force it into a defensive role, but you force it into having a role where it has to attack all the time, and then you might not notice that it actually can be a really good support mon in this week. But yeah, that's my round one pick. I was kind of happy about it. I'm still happy about it. I'm excited to see how Lucario is going to do. Now, my round two pick was, as I said, a long time after my round one. Like, I think, what are we? We are, I can't remember. I think we're like, is it 14 coaches? I think. Something like that. Like 14, 15, not 14 or 16 or something like that. So all the others had to draft and then draft one more time before I could draft. But I ended up picking up Galarian Weezing, who shall be known as Dimmadome, because it's Dark Dimmadome. I picked it up because it has a really good typing to match with both Lucario, but also the mon that comes after, because I drafted two mons together, you have to remember. It has a really good typing in Poison Fairy, which means a 4 times resist fighting that Lucario is weak to, but I can also use Levitate, so I can be immune to the ground type moves that want to hit Lucario. So I think the matchup there between those two are really good. Now, it was worth 13 points, which I think that's a really good value for Galarian Weezing, especially with what Galarian Weezing can do. As mentioned, it has levitate, but also has two really good other abilities in neutralizing gas and misty search. Now, neutralizing gas makes it so any ability on the field is rendered useless. So let's say they have a Gutsmon that is burned and you bring in Wheezing with neutralizing gas. The Guts no longer works. That means that the opposing Mon actually loses attack stat because it's now burned without having Guts. So neutralizing gas is really something you can play around with. Um, as you might have seen, I did in my UBA matches. Now, the last ability in Misty Search is interesting because you typically would pair Misty Search up with a Unburden Mon to try and gain speed and potentially set up and sweep with Unburden Mons. But I actually thought about using Misty Search just so people can status my Lucario or my other Mons. I can make it so people can stop my momentum by Thunder Waving or by Toxicking a Mon. So I think Misty Search is going to be really good on my team. Now, the downfall to Galarian Weezing is the same as regular Weezing. It's a bit passive. It doesn't do a whole lot of damage. It does get access to some good moves offensively. Um, but its special attack stat is 85, physical attack stat is 90, which is not terrible, but you won't typically have much investment into those attack stats. So therefore, you kind of just sit there sometimes, which makes it an easy setup target for bulky setup mons. Now, because we are in low tier draft, there aren't like Zygarde running around, for instance. Well, there's Zygarde Dog, but Zygarde Dog is not bulky by any means at all. Sorry, I just had to sit probably here. But yeah, you can still end up as a setup target for some mons. Now, the mon I paired Galarian Weezing up with as my round 3 pick was Incineroar, who shall be known as Overhaul. Now, Incineroar is really good with Weezing, because Weezing doesn't want to take steel type attacks, Incineroar doesn't care about steel type attacks, and Weezing doesn't want to go against psychic types, and Incineroar doesn't care about psychic types. So they have a really good defensive synergy there. I also really like Incineroar. I've used it before. I have been dying to want to use it again since I did. And this time around, I might be able to use it in a more offensive role than I did then, just because it's a low tier draft. So therefore, Incineroar is all of a sudden a really hard hitting mon compared to what you can find. Now, Incineroar was worth 14 points, which means it was actually worth 1 point more than Galarian Weezing, but I did pick up Weezing first just because I thought it was a little bit more important to pair up with Lucario. But when I saw I had got access to both of them, because of course I had the wheel pick, I immediately knew, okay, I'm picking both of them up, and it doesn't really matter how much, which order. So I just picked Incineroar second. Now, Incineroar has really good defensive and offensive power. You can run Intimidate, Rocky Helmet, Intimidate Leftovers as a physically defensive Incineroar. You can run AV, Heavy Duty Boots, a special defensive Incineroar, and Heavy Duty Boots can also be on physical, of course. As I mentioned, Incineroar can also be really good offensively. Like, you can run a Choice Band, you can run, like, I've seen a really good Flame Charge, Bulk Up, Power Trip set before. So, like, you Flame Charge, Bulk Up, and then because you have 3 stats increases, Power Trip becomes a really powerful move. You could pair that up with a potential weakness policy to go to have 5 stats changes, and therefore, no, not 5, that becomes 7. Sorry, 7 stat changes and make Power Trip an also super powerful move. Now, on my team, I actually also think that Incineroar is my best pivot. It gets access to both U-turn and parting shot, so even if you run a Assault Vest, you can still get out of a matchup by U-turning out, and if you can fit it on, you can parting shot out and lower the attack and special attack stat of whatever wants to come in against Incineroar. Lastly, I think Incineroar has a really good dual stab. Fire and dark kind of covers each other in the sense that there's not a lot of mons that actually resist both typings. You have to have a water fairy or a water dark, or something like that, or dark fairy. No, dark fairy, that wouldn't resist fire. Never mind. But yeah, so there's not a lot of mons that can actually cover for both of them. So if you run dual stab, you don't necessarily need to run anything else but that. Now, the biggest downfall about Incineroar is, of course, the lack of recovery. You don't get any recovery at all while wheezing. It doesn't have much reliable recovery. It does get pain split. Incineroar doesn't get anything except rest, of course. So you kind of have to either have leftovers or have a wish passer. And then, of course, Incineroar is also very hazard weak. It's weak to stealth rocks, it's weak to spikes, it's grounded, so it also gets affected by T spikes. Of course, that also means it gets affected by the spikes. But yeah, so if I don't run heavy duty boots, I have to make sure that I can keep hazards off the field to not wear down Incineroar too much. Now, my fourth pick, and I'm gonna try and speed up a little bit here because I'm already 15 minutes in, is gonna be Barraskewda. Now, originally I actually wanted Inteleon for this slot here as my offensive speedy water type. It got sniped literally the pick before me. So I had sat there for like hours on hours, hoping, okay, Inteleon is gonna come back, Inteleon is gonna come back. And then boom, it got taken. I had to like So I literally I actually asked what should I pick in the general chat, and someone said Barraskewda. I quickly looked it over and was like, you know what? I can make the points work with what I had planned for my team. I'll pick it up, and actually, I don't really regret it. I'm actually kind of happy about it because it's a new mon I get to test out. Well, Inteleon would have been new as well, but just it also pairs up with Lucario fairly well, in the sense that it it gets flip turn among other things. Inteleon also does that, but it has a slightly wider move pool than Inteleon, and it was worth 17 points, so that's why I was a little bit 50-50 on Barraskewda, but I think it's gonna end up being good. Now, Barraskewda's best quality, of course, is the insane speed of 136 space stat. It's the fastest mon, not counting Excelgor and Ninjask, I think, in low tier draft. And Regieleki was also added, so there's only like 3 mons that actually outspeed Barraskewda in the entirety of low tier draft, I think. I can't remember if there are others I'm forgetting. It got, as I mentioned, it got momentum in Isle of Armor where it got flip turn, so you actually don't have to go in and necessarily liquidation or whatever you want to do. You can just flip turn out immediately. And weirdly enough, it has a really good move pool. Like it gets close combat, poison jab, ice fang, throat chop. Like why does it get all those moves? I have no idea, but I'm happy it does. Now, the downfall to Barraskewda is little bit that it's a one-trick pony. Like you're gonna be running it physically offensive every week. You're gonna be running most likely Choice Band, Life Orb, Expert Belt. You don't really need like you can run Choice Scarf to make sure you outspeed everything that exists. You I guess you can run like focus sash if you want. There's not a whole lot of need to run stuff like leftovers because you don't want to take hits really anyway. You don't want to run ruggy helmet. Like it becomes a bit easy to predict, but that's where the rest of the team is gonna have to help it. It can be shut down by bulky water types kind of easily. If it's a pure water type with water absorb, you have no chance of really doing much damage to it. Like it has to have really bad physical defense then, because and that leads into the last point because it doesn't get any setup moves. Like you can't sword stance, you can't bulk up. I don't even think it gets a work up. Like it gets nothing if I remember correctly. So you can only really hit as hard as you can hit. So a bulky water type can pretty much go in and just sit there. Now, my fifth pick was with Barraskewda, and again, I was a little bit unsure on what I wanted, so I ended up going with Rune Regis, and the reason why I don't see a name is because I've not been able to come up with a goddamn nickname for this thing yet. Like, I have no idea. I usually call my Pythagoras Amenhotep, so I'm thinking about maybe Imhotep, but I don't know. I don't really think it fits. Now, Rune Regis was a mon I really wanted to try. I've been wanting to try it since it came out. It was worth 7 points, so it's actually really cheap, I think. It has really great defense all around. You have the same defensive stats as Pythagoras, 145 in defense and 105 in special defense, with a really low HP stat, which makes it a good defensive option, and if you have a wish passer, it actually also makes it a really good wish option to a wish mon to go into. You get access to several hazard moves in both stealth rocks and toxic spikes, which means it's gonna be the kind of mon I can bring just to get hazards up every week. Now, the downfall to Rune Regis compared to Pythagoras is the lack of utility moves. Pythagoras can be a really, really good offensive option besides being defensive because it gets Nasty Plot, it gets Calm Mind, so you can, or you can go with like a burn hex strategy where Runerigus, being a physically offensive mon, can really utilize Hex the same way that Pythagoras can. And while it does get access to the Nasty Plot and Coal Mine I mentioned, it doesn't work the same way because it doesn't have the special attacks that Pythagoras does. Um, and lastly, it's kind of prone to status moves like yeah, you're immune to T-Wave, but Toxics and I guess sleep and stuff like that. It's not because it's so slow. People are almost always going to be able to get stuff like that off against you, no matter what. Even if you're about to kill them, they can get like a last toxic off because of how slow it is. So that's a little bit annoying. Now I do think the ability of Rune and Regis is slightly better than Pythagoras, so you can kind of change ability with someone. Let's say someone has huge power, even though I don't believe there's a huge power in lower tier. I can get that. Now, my round 6 pick, I kind of wanted to continue building up my team, but also had to make sure I was looking at my points. So, as you saw, I picked Rune Regis, which wasn't worth a whole lot of points. And this man here, Miltank, which is going to be known as Super Cow, isn't worth super a lot either. It was kind of down the middle when in regards to points, because it cost 11 points, which I think is pretty good value for Miltank. When it comes to like chunky normal types, there's like Miltank, Snorlax on the high end, Liggy. There's a couple of those normal types that are just gonna be fat and kind of sit there. I think Miltank is one of the better options just because of the recovery move it gets. Because it gets access to Milk Drink, where others would typically get access to Wish, and you have to run Wish Protect or Wish and make sure you can live the hit. Well, Milk Drink is just a straight up heal move. Now, as I mentioned with Rune Regis, I do lose a little bit of synergy because I can't Wish into Rune Regis, which is that's gonna hurt the overall synergy on my team. So I might maybe swap Miltank out for like a different mon I can Wish with. But the positive thing about Miltank is it has a really good move pool because it's a normal type, and normal types get access to so much stuff. You get access to stealth rocks, and that's like the most important thing about Miltank is how you get stealth rocks. I get another hazard setter besides Rune and Regis, and I get a really good hazard setter. Now, the downfall about Miltank is it is very physically defensive. You kind of don't want to run into a especially offensive mon that has setup potentially because, like, while it does get access to Thunder Wave to slow things down, you most likely are gonna die if you go against a Calm Mine or Nasty Plot mon. And while Miltank is really, really fast, it doesn't really hit all that hard. It only has base 80 attack. So again, it can kind of be set up for the same way as Weezing, because it doesn't really hit that all that hard. Now, this get access to a bunch of moves, so you can potentially find stuff that can make it easier for not to be a setup fodder. But again, if you're against a fighting type, you don't want to stay in, and fighting type typically get a setup move. So it's kind of gonna be a difficult balance to have here. My round 7 pick, I wanted this mon a lot. I knew and kind of knew this was one of those mon I knew from the start of the draft that I wanted it. Just a sec. But also I wanted it because it has a cool typing. I've used it before, but that was when I picked it up mid season. This time I wanted it from the beginning. I think it's a really good mon, and that is Sigilyph, also known as Osiris. Sigilyph has a really good typing in Psychic and Flying. It has a good speed tier with some pretty good offensive pressure with 103 special attack. It kind of resembles Lucario in the big versatility because, as I mentioned here, you can run a special offensive variant with tinted lens, so any of your non-effective hits still hit harder than normal. But you can also run magic guard user, so you become a really good status absorber. You don't get affected by burn, you don't get affected by poison. You do actually get the speed drop from thunder wave, but for not thunder wave, from paralysis. But in general, you want to avoid paralysis. So, but I still think it makes Sigilyph a really good status absorber. Now, kind of similar to Lucario again, where Lucario can have the four move slot syndrome. This can have the which kind of monster is it gonna be? It can have the Mew syndrome, if you understand what I mean by that. That it has too many roles it need to fill. Uh, does it need to be offensive? Does it need to be defensive? Does it need to be support with defog? Does it need to be a status mon? Uh, it's a little bit one of those where you have to really be careful about which Sigilyph you bring each week if you want to bring it. Because if you bring an offensive mon, but they have a mon that shuts it down, it's actually not that good. Where if you bring a status mon, you have to make sure that they don't have some easy way to get rid of status as a mon that doesn't get affected by status. Because all of a sudden you have Sigilyph that doesn't do anything. And if you bring a defog mon, you have to make sure that you don't become an easy setup target for a different mon. And that kind of leads into the last negative about Sigilyph. It's skilled at a lot, but it's master of none. Its stats kind of goes with the whole with the sentence here that it has decent bulk, but not amazing bulk. So it's not just a good defensive type, like a good defensive mon. It has decently to good special offense, but again, it's not amazing. 103 is pretty okay. It's to the point where it's not necessarily set up fodder because of that. And its speed is 97, which again, 97 is decent in a low tier draft because generally the stats are lower. But in regular draft, for instance, 97 almost becomes a little bit slow in modern day era. Like not slow, but more like you can like you're most likely gonna be up against 2 or 3 monsters that are gonna be faster no matter what. So yeah, that's Sigilyph. My round 8 pick. Here we were starting to like round out the draft a little bit. I was like, I don't really know what I want. I need to fill out a couple of roles on my team. So I ended up picking up Raichu, the also known as Inazuma, and the role this is gonna be pretty much covering is a speed tier role mostly, because at this point I had from Sparrow Scooter all the way down to Miltank as the biggest gap in my speed tier. Well, I guess down to Runa Regis is also a big gap, but that's not as bad as base 136 down to base 100. So I wanted a mon in between there, and that was Raichu, base 110. It has some decent offensive pressure in both physical and special. Mostly want to run special because you can get access to Nasty Plot, but also just Thunderbolt, Ball Switch. It actually gets access to Surf. Now, I mentioned Volt Switch, which means this is one of the few mons on my team. I wish I had a little bit more momentum moves, like U-turn, Volt Switch, Parting Shot. This does get a Volt Switch, so as long as my opponent doesn't come in with a ground type, I can switch out. Now, Raichu actually also has some pretty decent utility moves. It gets Thunder Wave. I can't remember. No, it gets Wish. This is actually a Wish passer. It's not the greatest for the team because its HP stat is not all that great. But to a mon like Runa Regis, it can actually heal up quite a lot. I actually think it's really good value in 7 points. It could be 8 or 9, I think, because it can do quite a lot for what it is. And the access to Nasty Plot is probably the most value you have there. Like a base 110 mon with Nasty Plot, that's not bad at all. Now, The unfortunate part about Raichu is it is kind of easy to predict if it's gonna come. Like even though you get access to physical, like you have a physical attacking stat that is the same as your special attacking stat, you're gonna run special like 90% of the time, just because the move pool on the physical side isn't all that. Like you get a fighting type move in Brick Braid, you get knockoff, and you get wild charge, and that's pretty much it. Pretty much it. And with only base 90, you kind of want some setup, and you don't really get anything. Now, Raichu can't really touch a grass type all that much. Like you get Surf, you get electric moves, you get Focus Blast, and none of those are really good necessarily against the grass type. So if a grass type comes in, you kind of have to swap out no matter what, unless you're +2 or +4, and the grass type is already weakened a bit. So that's the unfortunate part about Raichu. It's easy to predict, and you can kind of get walled a little bit. Now, my 9 mon was kind of a how should I put this? A heartful choice for me. I have always wanted to use this mon, and I kind of know it's bad, but I just wanted to use it. I don't know why. It's one of my favorite mons. I remember from Gen 6. It's a Gen 6 mon. Just seeing it and being so, I don't know, filled with happiness. I don't know what it is about it, but it's a Go-Goat, which is going to be known as Philoctetes. And it's a weird as heck name. Now, quick story about the name. It's the name of the goat guy in the story from Hercules. Um, of course, you probably think about the Disney variant, but it's actually the actual name of the guy from the Hercules story. I just thought it kind of fit. I might shorten it down to Phil, but I kind of also like Philoctetes just because it's fun. Um, no, I won't be using the shiny variant of Go-Go. I do prefer normal. I just couldn't find a moving HD sprite of the normal ones. I had to use the shiny one. Now, as mentioned, Go-Go, it's more of a love choice for me personally. I just really like Go-Go. I wanted to try it. I needed a grass type. I didn't have a lot of points left. So I was like, sure, why not? So the reason it's the goat, like it's the goat. It's such a cool mon. I love Go-Goat. I don't know. I want to find out why it's considered so bad. Because whenever I look at the stats, I'm always like, that's actually not that bad. Like 123 HP. I think it's 100 attack. Then it's pretty bad defense in 60 something. I think it is. But then you had 97 special attack and 81 SPDEF. And your HP stats makes it so you don't need as much defense. So I think it's gonna be okay for the points it's in. Now, it has a really good recovery because you're not reliant on synthesis, because even though it's a grass type, because you get milk drink. It has more PP, and if there's a weather up, I don't have to worry about it because I have milk drink over synthesis. Plus, you also get leaf seed, so you can actually build a really bulky Go-Go that can be hard to take down for your opponent. Now, the main part about Go-Go that makes it bad is simply its abilities. It doesn't have a beneficial ability, if you're being completely honest. It gets Sap Sipper, which sure, it gives you an immunity to grass type, which is kind of nice, but most grass types gets access to some sort of poison move or bug move or something like that. So you don't necessarily want to go against them. And the other ability is Grass Pelt, and it makes the defense be 1.5 in grassy terrain. Now, I have Misty Terrain. I wish it was 1.5 in terrain in general, but no, then it wouldn't be called Grass Pelt. But I kind of wish that was what it was, because then I actually think Gogo would be kind of decent on a terrain team. Like 1.5 to its 63 defense, I think it is, would be 31 added. So that would be like mid 90s defensive. That's not bad. But I'm excited to see what Gogo is gonna do. I kind of hope it's gonna be like this big surprise to me, and everyone will be like, "Oh my god, it's so good!" And next season it's gonna be worth 18 points, and nobody's gonna draft it because they can't fathom why it's 18 points. I don't know. I just love Gogo. I want to see Gogo do do well. Now, lastly, I have 1 point left after this, and it wasn't calculated to have, like, I didn't want to have 1 point to go draft the one last mon. I just so happened to, there wasn't a grass type in the 4th point tier I really wanted, so I opted for Go-Goat in the 3-point tier, and that made it so I had 1 point left. And I kind of looked at my team as was like, what could I need? Now, I had a water type, but it's not bulky whatsoever at all. I didn't have a bug type, so I was like, sure, why not? And this one actually comes with a little bit of a good surprise in Dewpider. Dewpider is going to be known as Carnage Jr., because Carnage is my Araquanid, Araquanid, sick. Araquanid name. So this is the junior version. Now it actually get access to stick whips, which I knew, but it's like it's one of those where for 1 point I get a free sticky whip user. I get actually a decent, very emphasis on decent bulky water type. With an Eviolite, it has some okay defensive stats. Now, its HP stat is horrendous. It's only base 28, but its defensive stats with the Eviolite actually becomes like 78, 79 or something like that. It becomes pretty decent. So if I feel the need to bring it, or if I feel like I need sticker webs, I actually don't think it's a bad bring. Now, as I mentioned, it's 1 point and it's easy web and it's decent bulk for its cost. Now, the downside to Dewpider, of course, is I need to run the Eviolite. If I don't have the Eviolite, it's gonna die. Like, it doesn't have the bulk without the Eviolite. And it's a really, really passive mon. Like, it doesn't do a whole lot of damage. Liquidation with Water Bubble is the only move that does semi-decent damage. Other than that, you want to run like Toxic, Sticky Web, I don't know, Infestation maybe. So yeah, that's the team. That's my Roost low tier draft league team. Let me know what you think about it. I personally like it, but I definitely do think it's kinda on the more mediocre side of the teams I've drafted lately. I've been really good at drafting the last couple of leagues I've played in, and I think this, maybe it's because it's a low tier draft league and it's completely new to me when it comes to the drafting aspect. I don't know. I really like the first 4 months, and then Unarichis also really like, but it's kind of like the idea in the beginning was really good, but then the synergy kind of collapsed a little bit because I had to sacrifice. I had to pick up some mods that cost more than I wanted, and therefore I had to sacrifice on other places. Originally, I wanted Jolteon instead of Raichu because HP moves are allowed, so Jolteon is actually really, really good in this format. And that's also why I wanted Inteleon, because then I could get Inteleon and Jolteon and have 2 mons at base 125 and 130 being really, really good. I would have a whole lot more momentum moves. Well, actually, no, both Raichu and Barrascuda gets momentum moves. So I'm just being stupid here. But yeah, this is the team. I'm fairly happy. But with that, I just want to say thank you for watching. As always, make sure to leave a like on the video if you like the video. Leave a comment down below about anything. It can be about the team, it can be about your day, whatever you want. And subscribe to the channel for future videos and for the Roost Draft League. I will be recording all my matches each week. So be ready for the uploads. And with that, I'm out. Peace, YouTube.